Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of Chai Talk with Wajatli for the Left Hook Substack, where I have for the first time on Substack app chat Krystal Ball. Yes, it's their first time. I am so proud that I'm a man who's introducing these veterans to Substack app. I feel like one of the cool kids. Folks, Krystal Ball, you know her, you love her. You have seen her back in the day on MSNBC, but she has thankfully left, and she has established herself on YouTube. She co-hosts Breaking Points on YouTube with Krystal and Sagar. And then she also co-hosts Krystal, Kyle, and Friends on YouTube and Substack. She has had a foot in establishment politics. She knows how the sausage is made. She ran for office here in Virginia as a Democrat way back, and she consults. Did you still consult Democrats? You try to still elect Democrats or no, Krystal?
I haven't done that for a while, yeah.
Yeah, so she knows she knows all the angles, and I thought she'd be the perfect person. And I wanted to bring up that background of Krystal because sometimes people forget. Because I want to talk about the future of establishment politics from both sides, both Democrats and Republicans, how they're failing and how they are not going to reach the masses who want something different. And Krystal is a person who has talked for the last several years, critiquing the Democratic Party, talking about how the Democratic Party was going awry, and she got a lot of arrows from Democrats, from progressives, and voila, folks! Right now in 2025, the Democratic Party has its lowest favorability rating since 1994. So before we talk about Republicans, and I think you'll share my concern about the Republican Party, you
Yeah.
have used the A word, authoritarian. I have as well. Let's just focus on Democrats first before we get to Republicans.
Yeah.
The Democratic Party. You have seen the New York Times articles spending millions of dollars to try to find the liberal Joe Rogan, spending millions of dollars to do powwows in luxury hotels, to do SAM, the acronym, speaking to American men. I can't make this stuff up, folks. Alyssa Slotkin, the centrist Michigan senator who was given the privilege of speaking after Donald Trump's whatever that was, State of the Diarrhea Union, and she quoted, she praised Reagan, and recently she has talked about her war plan was to go against the weak and the woke and adopt the goddamn alpha energy of Lions coach Dan Campbell. Krystal,
Yes.
your take on the Democratic plan to re-win the folks.
Yeah, well, Alyssa Slotkin is a really good place to start, actually, because I've never seen a more, made up, like a phony psyop as the effort of the Democratic establishment to be like, look at this person. Isn't she great? Isn't this what you want? And I think it's very clear what the majority of the country and what a majority of the Democratic base wants. And it's been in evidence with the incredible enthusiasm for the Stop Oligarchy tour. The Republicans have their narrative of what has gone wrong in the country. Trump has his narrative. It's a horrible, evil, wrong, incorrect narrative about immigrants and trans people and cultural elites and college-educated women who are ruining your lives and destroying the country. It's wrong, and it doesn't solve the problems. It exacerbates them, but it at least had some sort of narrative cohesion. Democrats have really lost the thread in terms of offering a story of the world that makes sense to people. And it's quite obvious that when you point to the billionaire class, when you point to the oligarch class, it has a lot of explanatory power for exactly what's unfolding before us, exactly what's unfolding before us in the Trump administration. And it also has a lot of prescriptive power in terms of the type of policies we could pursue to get the country back on track. So when I see the Alyssa Slotkins of the world being propped up, when I see some of, I think, the abundance discourse also aims in this direction, it's like an attempt to avoid the very obvious next direction for the Democratic Party, the very obvious post-neoliberal direction for the left and the Democratic Party, because, Democrats have decided that they would also get in bed with big money, big corporate power. So it is uncomfortable direction for them. And that is why there are these efforts to forestall, I think, what would be the natural trajectory.
And you say forestall the natural trajectory because an uncomfortable truth that has emerged is a lot of people who voted for Donald Trump in 2024 They also voted for AOC.
Mhm.
And to me, what that shows is Donald Trump is a con man, right? He's a bullshit artist. This is a man born and bred in the establishment. He's a one percenter, born with a silver spoon, but he ran nonetheless, Krystal, on a populist message. AOC is working class. Her father passed away. She was a bartender. She had to put herself through school, and she runs on a type of populist anti 1% message. There
Mhm.
seems to be some commonality there, Krystal. Like, Joe Rogan, right? Joe Rogan of the left. Before Joe Rogan was a Trumper, this dude supported Bernie Sanders, right? And so you sit there in hindsight and say that, woulda, coulda, shoulda. But if Bernie was to run in 2024, I think he could have won. In 2016, I think Bernie could have won. And what Bernie was saying, whether or not you agree with all his policies, the same type of story, right? It's the 1% versus the 99%. They're
Yeah.
taking all of our cookies, all of our crumbs. They're completely taking all of our resources. They're leaving us with nothing. Unite the majority against the 1%, uplift everyone, healthcare, living wage. And people are like, I like that. But that seems to be a massive threat to the donor class, right?
Yeah.
And right now in 2025, Krystal, we still see this hesitation to embrace what is right there in their face, right? They've seen all the polls. Schumer, I think, is barely double digits, right?
Mm.
And let me give you another example. Jerry Connolly, Virginia, great representative, passed away, 74. Jerry Connolly threw his hand in the ring a couple of months ago and said, I want to be the head of oversight committee. Jerry Connolly was 73 a couple of months ago, folks, still had cancer.
Mhm.
And the other person who was running was AOC. And Nancy Pelosi from the hospital bed, Krystal, rallied votes for Jerry Connolly. Uh,
Incredible.
and then Jasmine Crockett. I always bring this example. Jasmine Crockett threw her head in the ring for the director of communications, and we got 71-year-old. I'm not trying to be ageist here, folks. Bernie's in his 80s. We got 71-year-old Debbie Dingle. I have yet to hear a Dingle banger in 4 months. I've seen Jasmine Crockett everywhere. They gave it to Debbie Dingle. I mean, as a person who knows the party machinery back in the day, this adherence to seniority, even as they're dying, Krystal. Like, I want to bang my head against the wall.
Yes, agreed. And I do think, not to go too ideological here, by the way, I saw somebody comment that the DNC's addiction to the gravy train gave us fascism, and I think that is a big part of the problem. Not to go too ideological, but the neoliberal era was all about individualism, right? It's about you pursuing your individual possibilities, ambitions, goals, etc. And it was about a deconstructing of the collective project that the country had been more or less engaged in under the New Deal paradigm. And I think the logical endpoint of that neoliberal ideology is a group of politicians who are there to pursue their own hopes, dreams, and ambitions versus a true commitment to the collective project that you would think that a quote unquote public servant should be a part of. And so when Jerry Connolly was up for ranking member of oversight and being pushed by Nancy Pelosi, et cetera, he said something to justify, his desire to go for this post even at his age and while he's battling cancer. He said something like, well, this is something I've always wanted and, effectively like it's my turn. And
Yeah.
that's exactly, I mean, that is a rot at the core of the Democratic Party and the way they think about what they are specifically doing here in DC and around the country that has to be combated. There was another thing I wanted to pick up on. You were talking about the AOC Trump voters. We actually did some focus groups with those AOC Trump voters
Mhm.
in New York. And there was a lot that was interesting there. I mean, for one thing, it's just always interesting to talk to people who aren't really subsumed in politics. And they did have this vibe of like, well, they're kind of similar, even though to us, we look at it through an ideological lens. We're like, that's insane. But they both had this energy of they're critiquing the system, right? They're anti-system. Now, we could talk about all the ways that Trump isn't actually anti-system, but that was the energy. The other thing, though, that came up repeatedly that I was frankly a little bit surprised about is they saw both Trump and AOC as being anti-war, and Gaza came up specifically. Now,
Mm.
again, we can talk like
Mm.
the evidence is on the table right now as we speak, the way that Trump has further fueled the genocide, is proposing full ethnic cleansing, has not solved the war in Ukraine, like all of the, and we could have pointed to all the problems in the first Trump administration where he was very hawkish, assassinating Qasem Soleimani and all those sorts of things. But oftentimes pundits, I think, will say, oh, well, foreign policy doesn't really matter in electoral politics. That's not how Americans vote. I think that's bullshit. Think back about, I think we're about, we're roughly same age and generation. Like the Iraq War was extremely politically activating for me,
Yep.
and I think many millions of other people. I think Barack Obama won the 2008 primary out of nowhere because of the Iraq War. I think Trump in 2016, because he was willing to criticize the Republicans and Bush and go after Jeb on the Iraq War in particular, I think that was influential in him winning the Republican primary. So I think to downplay the way that, our taxpayer dollars are being used to effectuate a genocide, in our names, like I think to downplay that and pretend like people don't care about that for a variety of reasons, I just don't think that that is accurate. I'm not saying it's the only thing that they care about. I'm not saying it was like the only determining factor in this election, but I do think it's been undersold as part of why there is so much disappointment and disgust with the Democratic Party that would claim to stand for high-minded principles while shipping 2,000-pound bombs to drop on a refugee camp.
Well, you mentioned the data. The data is actually there that a YouGov poll came out a couple of months ago and said the number one reason why a lot of Democratic voters who voted for Biden in 2020 stayed at home was due to Gaza. That wasn't the only reason, but that was the number one reason. And furthermore, the data shows that Gaza would not have, put Kamala over the edge, but her victory, her margin of defeat, which was narrow, 1.4, it would have been even more narrow, Krystal. And
Mm,
like you mentioned, I think what you just mentioned is key, is it would not have permanently disaffected so many voters, like disgusted them, said, I'm done, right? I think that's what it did. I was talking to a bunch of guys yesterday here in the DMV area, the Muslim American active in politics. And I was talking about that, I've gone and visited some communities, Muslim majority communities in the last couple of months, fundraisers. I was in Michigan recently. And, these Michigan voters, Krystal, and what's so painful, because again, I told people, I said, if it's between two evils, you always choose the lesser of two evils. Trump is far worse, right? So I said, if you have between Trump and Kamala, you vote Kamala because Trump will be genocide plus. In addition, take away Medicare, food stamps, being an authoritarian regime, yada, 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 yada. I want people to be very clear about that. But when you talk to these people in Michigan, right, they said we were winnable. Like we wanted to vote for Democrats, but Democrats literally kicked us out of rooms, wouldn't meet with us,
wow.
mocked us, and said, well, they're going to vote for us anyway. They're not going to vote
Mm,
for Donald. And meanwhile, Donald Trump and Republicans, yes, it's performative. Yes, it's bullshit. They sent them Richard Grenell. And you know what these voters said? Oh, at least we have an in. Someone talked to us. And Krystal,
yeah.
it's just human nature, right?
Wow.
If no one invites you to the party and someone then invites you to the prom, you go to the person who invites you to the prom.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
Democrats to this day were like, F you, shut up, get in line. And that was I kept telling Democrats, please, for the love of God, have a Palestinian speaker at the DNC. The bar is so low, it's in hell. You have to have a Palestinian speaker. The bar is so low that people are just desperate for any scintilla of change between Kamala and Biden. And
Hmm.
Krystal, they didn't even have a Palestinian speaker to speak. Like, what we said yesterday? We were talking about this. We could do a redo, take a DeLorean back. We're like, imagine if a Palestinian Democrat, oh, I don't know, the Palestinian representative from Georgia who gave her 3-minute speech, which was perfect, spoke right beside the Rose Goldberg Poland, the mother of the Israeli hostage, who unfortunately later we found out was killed, and whose speech that everyone loved her speech, right? Humanity, ceasefire. Imagine if she said the same thing from a Palestinian perspective and they held hands. What would have happened?
Yeah. Yeah. We'll never know. We'll never know. And you're so right that the bar was so low. This was someone who had a speech that was vetted, that was endorsing and backing Kamala Harris. Like, why wouldn't you jump on that opportunity? And then, of course, we've learned now behind the scenes how much pressure was put on Kamala not to break with Joe Biden at all. But ultimately, she's a big girl. She could have made her own decisions. And the fact that she couldn't even contemplate breaking from his line on continuing to, bear hug Bibi and support the genocide endlessly, that's ultimately on her, because there was such an obvious place where she could have said, hey, I'm a different candidate. Like, we all know that Joe Biden's presidency, for a variety of reasons, was not popular. She needed to provide some distance. Here's the perfect opportunity where there is a vast gulf between how the Democratic base feels and how the elected Democratic leadership feels. And she doesn't even go 1% of the way towards
Nope.
saying, you know what, we're going to do things differently. It's not going to be the same, et cetera. And so the results are what they are. And, for um, the discourse after the fact to blame people who said, you know what, I'm not going to vote. I can't. Like, I can't vote for a candidate that's backing a genocide. I can't blame those people. Like, I voted for Kamala Harris because I thought Trump would be worse. But I also don't blame people who said it's hard to imagine what worse could be. Unfortunately, I think we're seeing that in real time, what that worse
Yeah.
could be. But I can't blame people for saying, well, Biden Harris seemed ideologically locked in. Maybe Trump will be more transactional. Maybe it'll be, there's some possibility there that doesn't exist with Kamala Harris. And so it is 100% on the Democratic Party for refusing to reach out to those people who had a clear and valid moral objection to going along with what they were saying.
And for those who follow me, I try to be very fair. I critique when it's meant to critique. I praise when I praise. I don't do it both sides between Democrats and Trump. But on this issue, folks, this is an ongoing genocide. This is, I mean, just yesterday, I'm sure you saw that horrific news item. There's two horrific news items of how this war, this genocide has spilled over, as we warned it will. First and foremost, on the domestic front, you saw I think his name was Mohammed Suleiman, who burned, now they say 8 people, committed an act of terrorism against Jewish supporters for hostages. We've also seen 2 Israeli hostages who were killed. We've also seen Wadea, the 6-year-old boy who was brutally killed by his landlord. His mother was injured, Palestinian boy. We saw 3 Palestinian kids who were at home during break last year. They were shot. So this spills over. We've seen a rise in
That's right.
anti-Semitism, a rise in anti-Arab violence. And we've seen, I'm sure you've seen this and follow this, that white supremacists like Nick Fuentes just did it again last night, have used the genocide and the conflict to go against both Jews and Muslims and Arabs, right? Because they're
Yeah,
white
that's
supremacists. And you saw Nick
that's right.
Fuentes exploit it last night. And then you saw yesterday, Israel killed at least 20 people. Why did Israel kill at least 20 Palestinians? Firing warning shots because they were trying to get humanitarian aid. And because they did not disperse, Israel fired warning shots and at least killed 20 people. The fact that I just said this, Krystal, like I have to pause for a second. I want people to hear what I just said. This is happening thanks to direct support of the United States, our money, our taxpayer dollars, our missiles, and both establishment, the Republicans and Democrats supporting this genocidal government. Um, the fact that they're still married to this government, what does that say to you right now? Even though you've seen the polls, even for the first time in my life, Krystal, you saw the Gallup poll, a majority of Americans are against Israel. That never happened in your life or my life. We've been in this for a
Yeah.
long time.
Yep.
And the fact Republicans are split now. There's a huge split where a lot of Republicans are like, why the F are we supporting Israel? And
Hmm.
still there's a commitment. Why? Why is there a commitment to this death machine?
I think it operates on a few levels. One is campaign finance. Miriam Adelson gave her $100 million, and the Israel lobby is a real thing and it's very organized. And I think that for a lot of politicians, Joe Biden included, it has never in American politics been the wrong answer to stand with Israel, right, and to back up Israel. That has always been the political reality. And so it takes some time to realize that the politics have shifted. I think in the Democratic Party, that reckoning is going to come in 2028. I think it will be
Mhm.
a litmus test issue in 2028. But there also is an empire interest in Israel, in having a client state like Israel in the Middle East. And that's, that's the origins of why the US has, long supported with massive amounts of aid this one nation, in spite of the fact that, it's quite developed and they have universal health care. We don't, right? um, it was seen as a bulwark in the Cold War against, spreading Soviet communist and pan-Arab nationalism. And so that's the other thinking. Actually, RFK Jr. said something to that effect, and Joe Biden would say something to this effect. If there wasn't an Israel, we would have to build it from scratch. That's what they mean, is that they see it as serving American imperial interests. So, I think the money answer is like sort of the most easy and obvious one. And I don't want to say that that's not a significant factor, because it is. But I think the other part of it that often gets ignored is that mainstream politicians view Israel as a critical part of maintaining the American empire.
I think you're right. I think it's very important. In addition to the immense money and the immense political pressure that some politicians now openly admit, Cory Bush admits it, Jamal Bowman admits it, right? Because they were the ones who got hit with it. The ideological marriage to Israel, right? It's a dark joke, but I always say the way Joe Biden talked about it is as if like he had an affair with Golda Meir and like the best sex of his life, and like because he was like Golda Meir, I'm like, bro, let it go. And Aaron David Miller, I'm sorry for that image, everyone who's watching, forgive me. But Aaron David Miller in a New York interview with Isaac Chodner asked him, is like, did Clinton and Biden ever cry for Palestinians? He's like, no, they really cried for Israel and Israel's prime ministers, but I think it's ideological. Like they had a missing chip, right? And so his trademark empathy, Joe Biden, which he expressed throughout his lifetime, which helped him win in part the 2020 election. Krystal, I think people need to realize it's ideological because even I know people who work in the Biden administration. They said when it came to the past year and a half, I won't give names, but they're like Kirby, Sullivan, Blinken, uh, Biden. When it comes to Palestinians, just like nothing, like
Yeah.
just
They don't
dehumanization.
they don't see him as human. I mean, they just don't. And that's what's been so radical about Miss Rachel, just being like, these are
God
children.
bless Miss Rachel. God bless her.
Uh, Her ability with just, what she's done to humanize Palestinians and break that invisible wall where people see her with this adorable little 3-year-old who's, you know, bouncing around on her two prosthetic legs, while, by the way, her brothers and her dad are still in Gaza being starved. Just when you see that, it hits, oh my God, that could be my daughter. Oh my God, that could be my niece, my sister, my cousin. It could be me and my family. And that's why they're so mad at her, because of just her ability to make people realize these are kids. These are human beings who are being tortured and murdered and starved and maimed en masse by our government. And so that's why they cannot handle Miss Rachel, because you're right. The only way, people who would call themselves liberal, like a Joe Biden, could perpetuate these atrocities and fund and fuel them is by not really thinking that Palestinians are full human beings. And that is you're so right. That is absolutely at the core of it. That is absolutely at the core of what is going on here. And I, the only thing that it feels like such a hopeless situation in a lot of ways. The only thing I can say is that Israel is only allowed to do what it's allowed to do because of the United States. And the reckoning in the Democratic Party, like at the base level, that's already happened. They've already lost the Democratic base. They've already lost independents. They've lost young Republicans. The only group
Yeah.
that really still backs Israel in the same way is like boomer Republicans. And so whatever horror they're allowed to accomplish now, it is not going to be able to be sustained in the long term. But that's cold comfort when you see their attempt to effectuate effectively a final solution in the near term.
Yeah, and the Israeli Security Cabinet voted for Israel to occupy Gaza and to remove the population to the south, which is just another way of saying ethnic cleansing. Before we move to the Republican Party, you mentioned the reckoning happening in 2028, and I'm just really
Yeah.
curious, Krystal, your predictions. We don't know. We're going to see what happens, right? Everything
Hmm.
changes, but right now, according to the polls, the face of the Democratic Party is AOC, 26%, and then 26% is nobody, and then there's a few other names, right? But you know who it isn't? Rahm Emanuel. You know it isn't Alyssa Slotkin. You know it isn't Hakeem Jeffries, right? All the people they want. It's these fresh new faces who want something bold. Even Van Hollen, right? It's not. It has nothing to do with people who happen to be women or people color. White dudes, anyone who fights. It seems that anyone who's willing to fight for the people. Van Hollen, Senator Van Hollen, went by himself, folks. For those who don't know, to El Salvador. I think a lot of Democrats should have joined them. And he said, I won't leave until I get proof of life of Abrego Kilmar Garcia. It was in the news for 2 weeks. Donald Trump is now negative double digits on Abrego Kilmar Garcia. And Senator Von Howland, all of a sudden, his hat's been thrown in the ring for 2028 presidential race. For the Democrats who want, I think there is a vacancy of leadership.
Yeah.
I also think there's a cold civil war in the Democratic Party that no one's mentioning. 2028, if there's Democrats watching right now, who do you think, what message and what type of personality is needed to recapture this majority that I think also will turn on Trump, already has, according to the polls, because he's underwater? What's the path that they should take?
I mean, you've got to have a fighter who's willing to name names and call out villains. I mean,
Mm.
that's really the bottom line. And I will say, so with regard to AOC, um, I've had my critiques of her in the past. I really wish she hadn't stood up on the DNC stage and said Kamala Harris is working tirelessly for a ceasefire, for one example. She has impressed me in the second Trump era, at a time when so many Democrats and so many media institutions and law firms and universities were bending the knee and capitulating and, really like fearful and cowering. She really stepped into the breach. And I think she has really come into her own as a politician who has the potential to carry a national message, which is not something I actually thought before. So I do think that she has a pretty good shot if she were to run for president, and I do think that she's exhibited some of the qualities that um, could make her successful. I think the Democratic base, they were really psyoped into believing that like you needed a centrist like Joe Biden or or Hillary Clinton to beat Donald Trump. Obviously, didn't work out so great. And because of that, the combination of that reckoning with the fact that many of the centrists were the ones who were like, Joe and Mika going down to Mar-a-Lago, we're doing the like bend the knee thing, or hey, let's just do nothing and wait for their fuel to burn out or whatever. Like, because so many of the more moderate centrist establishment Democrats took that capitulation approach, or voting for the Lake and Riley Act would be another concrete example.
40 plus House Democrats voted for that nonsense.
I think that really discredited a lot of that wing of the party. And so, what most of the base looks to be seeking is just someone who's willing to throw a punch, who's not afraid, who's going to be fearless, who's going to fight. And they're under no illusions that like there's any magic wand or any one thing that you could do. But if you see Senator Van Hollen going down, to CCOT and challenging them, and you see AOC and Bernie out on the Fight Oligarchy tour, there were a lot of normie Democrats who came to those rallies that weren't like longtime Bernie bros. I think that really shows you where the heart and the soul of the party is at this point, and also where the country is, because there's a reason we ended up with Trump. It doesn't come out of like a normal political
Yeah.
era that you end
Yeah.
up with this, horrifying fascist authoritarian guy.
No, and you mentioned something. I think we're on the same age. I think I'm a bit older, and I've aged far worse. But I was a college
You just wear
student when
less
9/11.
makeup.
Yeah, I was 20, about to turn 21, a senior at UC Berkeley when 9/11 happened. One of the leaders of the Muslim Student Association. Yay! Great timing, great luck. And I remember that. I remember those 8 years vividly. A lot of people have amnesia. We live in the United States of amnesia, and they forgot. Some Muslims forgot. And I remember, and I was telling someone this recently, that we would not have had Barack Hussein Obama, our first black Muslim president, if it wasn't for the failure of the war on terror and the economic crisis of 2006 that I had to live through as a young man. Those crises told Americans, you know what, we'll go with this black dude named Barack, right? Which was unthinkable at the time, Krystal. You and I are old enough, right? But people are willing to have that change. And I do think everyone who says AUC doesn't have a shot, I'm like, a lot could happen in the next couple of years, folks. I mean,
Hmm.
she's proven to be really popular. If you can have Donald Trump, a fascist, you can have AOC. And now I want to switch to Republican Party because you use the words that I use. I call them a fascist. It's a wannabe fascist regime. It's a
Hmm.
right wing authoritarianism. I think we're not
Hmm.
dealing with a normal conservative movement. I think we're dealing with a pro death, right wing authoritarian movement that's playing for all the marbles. And I want to ask you about this just gem of a quote that Senator Joni Ernst said that I think is so pure, Krystal. And pure in the worst ways possible. Pure in the sense that it reveals, when she was asked, for those who don't know, at a town hall, people asked her about the cuts to Medicaid, the cut to food supplements that are kill people. She said calmly, with a smile on her face, well, we're all going to die. And the next day, she trolled everyone by walking through a cemetery and doubling down on the comments. Now that we talked about the Democrats, Tell me about the Republicans under Trump in this moment and moving forward.
I think that moment with Joni Ernst really shows you the extremism of the entire Republican Party and that it goes much deeper than just Trump. Because, I mean, that statement speaks for itself. It's a caricature of what we've been saying about what their healthcare plan is, right? She like did the meme, like the Republican healthcare plan is die quickly or don't get sick. Like that's what it is, you know? And to further the horror of what she had to say at the end of the walking through the cemetery video, she says like, "Oh, and if you want to seek eternal life, you know, my Lord and Savior Jesus Christ." It's like, yeah, I'm sure. I'm sure. At the same time, you're in glee, like gleefully denying millions of people health care. You also have the audacity to act like there's anything Christian about that particular sentiment. But you know, if you look at the priorities of this bill, which has already passed through the House, and, you know, there's some question marks in the Senate, but pretty limited resistance at this point. And I haven't heard anything from like the supposed moderates like the Collins or Murkowskis about it. The priority is gigantic tax cuts to the tune of trillions of dollars for the wealthiest people in the world and a massive expansion of the police state,
Yep.
ICE and private prison detention facilities, and a $1 trillion defense budget. Okay, so we've got, you know, the military, the police state, and the rich people funded at the expense of the poor. That's their values. That's what's in this budget. That's their values. Okay, massive cuts, 8 million people plus kicked off of healthcare. By the way, there's some changes to Medicare and the Affordable Care Act that are also going to be damaging to people, not to mention the cuts to food stamps, not to mention this provision that says you can't regulate AI at the state level, not to mention another provision that says, hey, you know, you can't find Donald Trump in contempt. You can't find this government in contempt, limiting the ability of courts to hold the executive accountable. But the top line, extraordinarily extreme direction of this bill, which again is backed by almost everybody in the party, is a gigantic giveaway to the rich, a massive expansion of the police state at the expense of the poor and the working class. That's the values. It's as extreme as it gets. And we're not just talking about Donald Trump here. So that's, you know, I think the Joni Ernst comment is a window into the quite disturbing and, you know, fringe mind of the Republican Party at this point.
And it's not just the fringe mind because it's the mainstream now, right? It's
Yeah,
the it's echoed by all the right wing talking points, and as mainstream media keeps coddling this overt fascism and what I call a pro-death cult, I've been saying it for a while, precisely for this reason. The Overton window keeps shifting further, further, further to the right.
yeah,
What's seen as normal, you know, the fact that on Saturday night, Donald Trump, the world's oldest man to be elected president, shared a QAnon conspiracy about Joe Biden being a clone. It's Monday. No one's talking about it, Krystal.
I
Uh,
know.
the, fa- the fact that yesterday, Tulsi Gabbard, apparently there was a leak saying that Tulsi Gabbard is thinking about doing Fox News style video briefings for Donald because he doesn't read his intelligence briefings. I don't know. I'm thinking this should be big news, right? With national security, especially after Signalgate, and the fact that $880 billion is going to become for Medicaid, and the fact that Joni Ernst said this, and it's all just gone from the news. And we're hearing about Jake Tapper and his book. It just seems infuriating because, like you said, it's going to be the greatest wealth transfer in U.S. history. Let's just call it
Yeah,
theft. It'll be the greatest theft. And so it goes back to the framing that Alyssa Slotkin hated, fight oligarchy. I think that's good framing. If you don't like the oligarchy, how about 99% versus the 1%, Krystal? Because I think they're going to have the votes. I hope they don't. I know I'm living in the upside down, Krystal, because I've heard Rand Paul recently talk about tariffs and this, and I'm like, who's speaking right now? They're making very intelligent points. I look at the TV screen, it's Rand Paul. I'm like, the world is ending. What's happening right now?
I mean, true libertarians, you can, I can work with anyone who has some principles they're willing to stand by. You know, you saw Thomas Massey out there saying, hey, this Israel military funding, he's been standing against also these like, hey, let's define anti-Semitism in a way that means you can't criticize this one foreign government. And Rand Paul has shown some, has shown some principles at times too. When it comes to, he doesn't like the spending, like the his critique is not my critique, but at least he has a principle outside of just I'm going to do whatever Donald Trump wants me to do. So that piece you have to ultimately respect, and on tariffs as well. But one other point I wanted to raise that I think isn't maybe getting enough attention is this effort for Palantir to
Oh yeah.
scoop up all of
Oh yeah.
our data and create this, massive like database tracking every point of information that the federal government has about any of us, which is extensive. I was talking to Ken Klippenstein a little bit about this. We're going to have him on Breaking Points tomorrow. But he said one of the real checks in favor of civil liberties has just been that it's the database of all of us and all of our data has always been too much for the federal government to really be able to like wrap their arms around and consolidate and control and contain in some sort of useful way. And now we're at a technological inflection point where that is no longer the case. So all of these, all of the libertarians who lined up with the Trump administration, there was so much discourse on the right about government overreach and censorship and all of, lockdowns, all those sorts of things during the Biden era. I wonder if they realize what a monster is being created right now that everyone should be horrified by. And it ties into the immigration conversation as well, because if you are truly going to do mass deportation, which I think is immoral, but you are not just going to be impacting immigrants, because in order to do this massive immigration crackdown and deportation, you have to first distinguish who is immigrant and who is citizen, which means tracking and surveillance and police state of all of us,
Yep.
all of us. And we've also already seen the way so many American citizens have either been directly, wrongfully detained, or they're married to an immigrant so their right to marry who they want is being quashed. I really want people to realize that there is no mass immigration crackdown without a mass nationwide police state crackdown that infringes on all of our liberties. And the Palantir, database collection is an important piece of that.
And Palantir folks, go check out Peter Thiel and his investment in Palantir. And Peter Thiel is part of the South African PayPal oligarchy. And without
Mm-hmm.
Peter Thiel, there's no JD Vance. And without Peter Thiel and his money, JD Vance is not hand delivered to the White House. And connecting the dots, and I know people don't like hearing this, but we have to be honest. 9/11, the war on terror, many of us kept warning Americans that you're giving up your civil liberties for the appearance of freedom to go after the Muslims and the Arabs. And people are like, F it, go after the Muslims and Arabs. We'll give up our civil liberties and we'll allow the Patriot Act and we'll allow ICE. And voila, fast forward, Spencer Ackman had a great book, Reign of Terror, where he looks at the big macro level and said that without the war on terror and without Islamophobia, there's no Donald Trump. And right now, that surveillance state that is being created, thanks to the war on terror and Americans voluntarily giving up their freedoms to go after the bad guys, right? And so now the bad guys are transgender people and the immigrants and innocent brown folks, But the police state, as we have seen, even during the crackdowns during the George Floyd protests, they were cracking white elderly skulls in Portland. Remember that? Like people dressed up like friggin' Halo commander officers, right? I'm using a video game reference. You're like, whoa, these are like friggin' it looks like Iraq in on the streets of like suburban America.
Mm-hmm.
That's what's gonna happen. That's what's gonna happen, folks. Two quick last questions, Chris. I've kept you longer than I thought, but you're on a roll, if you don't mind. Is the future of the Republican Party? Where does this end? Because Donald Trump is an old man. He's the oldest man to be
Mm-hmm.
elected. I think he's lost several steps.
Yeah.
There's multiple examples. Does this survive without Donald? I don't think he's going to make it the whole term in some capacity, not like in his full physical capacity. Where if Republicans take this to the end, what are we seeing?
I don't know. I would like to
Mm,
say, and a part of me believes Donald Trump is he is a uniquely charismatic figure. There's no doubt about that. And when you see like, Ron DeSantis that tried to do like a copycat version of him and people were like, actually, we really hate you. It doesn't pull it off. JD Vance doesn't pull it off. Don Jr. doesn't pull it off. At the same time, the reason I hesitate is simply because it's not like the far right is only rising here. There
yeah.
is a global trend of rising fascism. And so, we can't just sit back and wait for Donald Trump to die and think that the ship is going to right itself. It's not. We have to offer a muscular alternative vision that makes sense to people, that is genuinely revolutionary in its own right, because that's what people are looking for. Like, you have to replace the neoliberal era with something that fits the deep concerns and, frankly, existential crises that we're facing right now. I mean, it is an existential moment between climate crisis, and I'm deeply concerned about AI, and the just unleashing of barbarism that is endemic with what's going on in Gaza as well, which is not a genie you can easily put back in the bottle. I mean, we need the equivalent of like Nuremberg trials to hold people to account, to forestall the possibility of this just being our new reality. So we need a movement that meets the existential nature of these times. And so, just waiting around for Donald Trump to die and hoping that it's going to be better after he's gone is not a strategy.
So you're saying inshallah is not a strategy, Krystal Ball? Is that what you're saying?
I mean, definitely say inshallah as well. But, you know,
Inshallah without deeds is meaningless, right?
there you
And and
go.
and, and Crystal makes a good point. With right wing fascism increasing around the world, it's copycat, folks. They learn from each other. Modi's crackdown against Kashmiris is copied in part by Israel's crackdown against Palestinians. And America says, "Oh, Israel, that's how you crack down against Palestinians. Oh, that's
Mhm.
good. We'll learn from that." Chinese crackdowns against Uyghurs. They're like, "Oh, you did that." Bolsonaro's like, "Oh, you did a lie about." Winning the election that you lost. Let me try that in Brazil. And thank God, just barely enough Brazilians said, now Bolsonaro bullshit. We're learning from what happened in America. So if we
Yeah,
don't have a
so
robust,
we need to learn from Claudia Sheinbaum. We need to learn from Lula da Silva. We need to
there
learn.
you
There
go.
are some models we can learn from as well, that of a vision that does appeal to people and has enough heft to defeat the fascists.
And I think the winning message, folks, I think the winning message is the 1% versus 99%, us versus the oligarchy. I think it'll be a winning message. My final question to you is because you were like me, we're in the media. We've had a foot in the mainstream. We've been
Mhm.
independent and the foot in the mainstream. I was a contributor for CNN for a year. I've also been on MSNBC. You were a host at MSNBC. Uh, and you might disagree with my assumption here, but the failure of corporate media in this moment, while we are dealing with what you and I agree with, Krystal, is the rise of fascism, your commentary on that and what we've seen with Jake Tapper in particular.
I mean, corporate media has corporate aligned incentives. It's always gonna be that way. There's always going to be a shortfall in, it's very noteworthy that you can get any sort of ideological flavor in these places, but people who hold the views of you and I are very rare. And it's because a true, like, left-wing ideology is not comfortable for corporate power. And, so it's not surprising to me that when you have these corporate behemoths, massive conglomerates that have many financial interests, that their first move when the Trump administration comes around is, how do I bribe them? How do I come and bend the knee and make sure I'm on their good side? Because they know the type of retribution that will be meted out, and they're not interested in standing up for democracy. That's not their priority. So, it reminds me of during Bernie's campaign when he was critical of the Washington Post ownership of Jeff Bezos and all these liberals. How dare you? How could you assert that Bezos would have anything to do with it? And now you see it all playing out very clearly, the way the corporate interests control what's allowed to be done at the news outlets. And it's like, this should have been obvious to anyone who really thinks not in terms of the individuals, but in terms of the structures of power and the outcomes that inevitably creates.
And to quote the Born Identity, look at what they make you give. And was it worth it, folks? Tim Cook is still mocked and ridiculed by Donald Trump, who's demanding Apple make iPhones in America so they can cost freaking $3,000. He
Mm.
went against Leonard Leo and the Federalist Society a couple of days ago, right? He's mocking and MAGA hates Jake Tapper even more and are promoting more conspiracy theories. And now law firms that bent the knee, now we're finding out that corporations are realizing, oh, people don't want to work with you. So look at what they make you give. It's never enough for a fascist. They gobble up everything. What you need is a robust resistance, and you need people willing to fight. And I believe you need people who have the training and the background, who are trying to be ethical and moral and fight the good fight in independent media. You should support them. Support them with your eyeballs, support them with your time. If you don't have the money, share. And so with that, Krystal, was the first time you were on. My connection is completely broken. So for me, Krystal, it says live 0, but I'm thinking there's people. Can you see how many people are watching us right now?
It says 8:06.
Thank you to the 806 people. Usually I read out all the comments, the questions, but there's some glitch. I'm just going to blame the deep state. So that's why I couldn't see you. But thanks to 800 plus people watching for the first time that I've got Krystal on. Krystal, thank you for your time. Please, before you leave,
Yeah.
shamelessly promote yourself. How can people find you, support you, watch you?
Well, I will do shameless promotion right now because over at breakingpoints.com, we're doing a free month trial. So you can sign up for a month free right now if you want to try it out. And, live AMA and free, no ads, all that good stuff. But appreciate you guys. Appreciate you, Watch Out. It's great getting to chat with you. Thank you for giving me my initiation to Substack Live. This was fun.
And also, Krystal, like all my guests are terrible at self-promotion. It's not just Breaking Points. Krystal hosts Breaking Points on YouTube. She also hosts Krystal, Kyle, and Friends on Substack. So please subscribe. Please, if you can, be a paid subscriber. If not, be a free subscriber. And folks, please follow her on social medias, all the good ones. Are you still on the X or no?
I am still on X. Yeah. In fact, I've been slacking over at Blue Sky. I have a hard time posting in multiple places. So
She's hosting
I'm
like
going to get
800
better.
shows, and she's a mama. Thank you all for watching on the Left Hook, Substack.com, folks. I keep everything free. There's no paywalls. You pay what you can. I'm a terrible, terrible capitalist. My immigrant parents are in pain, but nonetheless, I believe a population should be informed. Whatever you give, I appreciate it. Please spread the good word. Support independent media. Thank you to Krystal. Everyone, be kind. Take care of yourselves. Take care of your family. And please, oh, please, don't be a fascist. Take care, Krystal.
Thank you. Bye.